Welcome to solverfy.
So here we have, I've already written out a model, a matrix model for both plants. And so the first column in both of the matrices represent the t-shirts, the number of t-shirts that are being produced in the plants, right? Because this section up here are the plants, right? This whole section up here, right? Okay. And then, so these are the t-shirts produced here. Same with here. And then here we have the sweatshirts. Okay. Here we have the sweatshirts as well. So this is basically the 3x2 matrix. And if you're wondering what each row is, well, the first one is, I'll say S for standard, D for deluxe, and P for premium, which is basically the different quality levels. And so those numbers are just how many. So like 3,820. And that's just in one. Like it doesn't like mean like in thousands or in millions. It just means that's how many. So 8,820 for this first one, and then that would be t-shirts. This one would be number of sweatshirts, etc. So that makes sense. Same with here. I'll put the same letters over there. Okay. Now we're going to move on to part B. So let me just say this is part A, which is done. Part B is saying we're going to use those matrices and we're going to find how many more or less articles of apparel are made. Okay, so to do that, we're going to, let's see, we're going to write out here basically just like subtract, right? But the thing is, it's just saying apparel or like clothing, right? That means like everything, right? Because all of this is clothes. It doesn't matter like what quality or what type of clothing, just clothing, which means we're going to add everything from both and then subtract from there. Okay, so for Verdi, I'm going to do that first. So we're going to say Verdi total. Okay, so we're going to have that much. Just double checking. Yep, that much. And then from the other plant, we're going to have this much. So we just have to subtract them. Okay. And we get 3,900 more articles of clothing from Minsk, or however you pronounce that, factory. Okay? That is the answer. Now moving on to C. We have to find how many shirts are going to be made at both of the plants in the next fall. And in the next fall, what's going to be happening is a 4% increase in business. So a 4% increase in terms of a number that you're going to multiply means 1.04. So we can basically say 1.04 times each matrix that we already established here, okay? And we want to find how many shirts. So if we're looking for just, they're both types of shirts because there's t-shirts and sweatshirts. So the question is basically just saying to do the same thing, like add every entity in after you multiply it by 1.04. Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. And then just kind of get the answer and then do the same thing with the other plant. Okay? That's how we're going to do it. Okay, so let's just do that. And we get a couple of decimals, but I'm just going to round down because you can't make like a decimal of a shirt, so I'm not going to round up. I'm going to be modest with this calculation, okay? Okay, last one. And this is what I get, okay? So I just cut off all the decimals just to make it into integer values because you can't make a portion of a shirt, okay? That's what we get for that. Now let's look at the other plant and then do that calculation. Last one. Okay, so that's what we get. And we can then basically, I mean, that's basically what it is. How many shirts of each type. So if you want to find how many shirts of each type, then we can add these down, right, between each thing, because each one is a different type. Or this already represents each type, because each type also means of the quality. So this is basically going to be your answer, because it tells you each category, just like we talked about before. Of course, you can add different entities to get different information of how many of this quality, how many of this from this plant, whatever you want to find. Okay. Then for part D is saying what will be the total production next fall for each type of apparel from both plants. So now that we're trying to do both plants, that's when we just do matrix addition, right? Because it's saying for each type of apparel basically means each entity, because each entity is a different type of apparel, right? A t-shirt that is this quality, a sweatshirt that is another quality, whatever, right? So we're just going to add up these two right here, okay? We're going to add up the two that I highlighted. Maybe I'll box it in a nice color. I'll do blue. We're going to add up those two, okay? And that will be our answer for D. So remember to add up two of these matrices. We just need to add up each entity because they have the same order. And maybe if you kept the decimals and then you added it, it could have made whole numbers or be a little, it could have been a little more accurate, but I didn't really anticipate this problem. But, you know, this is stuff that different people can account for when they're doing their own research, their own business, you know. But for our purposes, we're going to be off maybe by 1 or 2 numbers, but the general thing is going to be there. But it made sense why I didn't do, you know, why I didn't include the decimal, right? Because you can't just have a portion of a product. In some cases, yeah, if you're like weighing out, you know, how many pounds of meat you want, yeah, you can do that, but you can't do that in this case, right? Okay. Hopefully the fact that I wrote it out like not horizontally this time doesn't confuse you, but same concept. Just add up each entry. And when you do so, you should get this as your final answer for D. Okay. And that is the end of this whole problem. Let's go back so you can just see everything one more time. Okay.